She was a good mule, Josephine, steady as a fence post and about as talkative, and she stopped dead in the middle of that dry wash with her ears swiveled forward like two brown leaves turning to catch the light. I clucked at her. She did not move. I have known that animal long enough to trust her nerves over my own, so I sat there in the saddle with the October sun coming up hard behind me, and I listened. Wind first. There's always wind in that stretch of country, low and constant, dragging grit across the flats and hissing through the Ocotillo. Then the tick of cooling rock. Then, under all of it, threaded so fine I thought at first it was my own ears ringing. A cry. Now I want to be honest, because I have spent too much of my life telling things smaller than they were, and I am done with that. My first thought was not tender. My first thought was trap. That country in the autumn of that year was not a place where a man heard a helpless sound and rode toward it like a fool in a church play. There were Apache out, the ones who had not gone into the agencies, the ones the newspapers back east made into devils to sell their columns. And there were white men out too, worse than any Apache I ever met, men who would use a baby's wail the way a fisherman uses a worm. So I did not ride toward it. I sat, and I took out my ledger. That is a thing I do. My father's habit come down to me. When I do not know what to do, I open the little book I keep buttoned in my breast pocket, and I write down what I know for certain, because a man who writes down what is true has less room left for what he is afraid of. I wet the pencil and I wrote Oct. 3. Dry wash below the Twin Buttes. A crying, Josephine spooked. No smoke, no horses I can see. Then I read it back to myself, and the reading of it settled me enough to look proper. There was a wagon. It sat maybe 200 yards down the wash where the bank cut a shoulder of shade, and it was the sorriest excuse for a wagon I ever laid eyes on. A little farm rig, the kind a homesteader hauls his life in, canvas gone gray and torn along one bow so it flapped like a hurt bird. One wheel had dropped into the sand up to the hub. There was no team, no oxen, no horse, nothing to have pulled it there, and that was the wrongness that made the hair stand up on my arms. A wagon does not walk itself into a wash. Somebody had brought it there, and then somebody had gone. The cry came again, and this time the wind laid down for a moment and let me hear it whole, and it was a baby. No mistaking it. A baby crying the way they do when they have been crying a long, long time, not the sharp new scream, but the worn-down, hiccuping, exhausted grief of a child that has learned nobody is coming. I have no children of my own, never married. I will get to why maybe if this account runs long enough. But there is not a man alive worth the name who can hear that particular sound and keep his belly still. I got down off Josephine. I want to set the picture right, because the details are what I remember when the years try to sand it smooth. I remember the sand was still cold from the night on the shaded side and warm as bread where the sun had got to it, and I could feel both through the soles of my boots as I crossed. I remember a single buzzard hung up high, not circling, just riding the morning, patient as Sunday. I remember my own heart going like a woodpecker and my mouth gone to cotton. And I remember thinking, plain as anything, Silas, you old fool, you are about to change your whole life, and you cannot even see how yet. I called out, "Hello, the wagon." My voice cracked on it. I had not spoken aloud in 2 days. Nothing answered but the child. I came up on it slow from the side, my old Spencer down but ready, and the smell reached me before the sight did. I will not dress it up. It was the smell of death, 2 or 3 days into its work, sweet and thick and terrible in the heat, and mixed into it was blood and the sourness of a soiled child and something else, a smoke smell, cook fire smoke gone cold. I breathed through my mouth. I have smelled that smell on battlefields and in a cholera house in '67, and I never once got used to it, and I hope to God I never do, because the day it stops turning your stomach is the day you have lost something you needed. I pulled back the flap. There was a woman. She lay on her side in the wagon bed on a blanket that had once been red and was now mostly rust-brown with old blood, and she was Apache. I knew it at once, the deerskin of her dress, the way her hair was cut and wrapped, the pattern of the beadwork gone dull at her collar. She was young. That is the thing that took the wind out of me. She could not have been more than 19 or 20, a girl really, and she was dead. She had been dead a full day at least. Her face had that stillness that is nothing like sleep, that no living face ever wears. There was a wound low in her side, wrapped tight with a strip torn off her own dress, and I understood then that she had not died quick. She had died slow, over days, in the back of a broken wagon in a dry wash, holding on to something. And the something was the child. The baby lay in the crook of the dead woman's arm, wrapped in a cradle board laced up tight, and it was alive, and it was screaming, and its little face was cracked and red, and its lips were split white with the thirst. It could not have been more than a few months old. When the light hit it, it turned its head and looked at me. Babies that age cannot see far, I know that, but I swear to you it looked at me, and it stopped crying. Just for a moment. It stopped, and it stared, and it made a sound like a question. I stood there, and I could not move. I have tried many times over the years to say what went through me in that moment, and I have never managed it. So I will just tell you what I did, because a man's doings are more honest than his sayings. I put my rifle down in the sand. I took off my hat, I do not know why, the way you do in a church or over a grave. And I said out loud to a dead Apache girl I had never met, "I am sorry, I am so sorry, I did not come in time." Because that is what it was, wasn't it? I had not come in time. Nobody had. She had lain there dying with her baby in her arms, and she had listened to that same wind I listened to, and no one had come, and now the coming was mine to do, and it was too late for her by a full day. Here is the first hard thing, and I put it down plain. The baby was Apache, and in that year in that country an Apache child was not a child to most of the men I knew. It was a problem. It was, to the ugliest of them, a scalp with a bounty, because there were counties paying money for them, and I will not write down the amounts because it shames the whole race of white men to know we set a price on such a thing. To bring that child into a town, to a fort, to a homestead, was to bring danger down on both of us. There were men who would kill me for it as quick as they would kill the child. And there were men, better men, churchmen, kindly-meaning men, who would take the baby from me and send it off to some school back east where they cut the children's hair and beat the language out of their mouths and called it charity. I knew all of that, standing there with my hat in my hand. I balanced it the way I balance everything. On the one side of the ledger, every reason to close that flap, get back on my mule, and ride on and forget I ever turned down that wash. My own skin, my own quiet life, the plain sense of a man who has learned the hard way to mind his business in dangerous country. And on the other side of the ledger there was nothing at all, nothing I could write, no profit, no sense, just a thirsty child looking up at me and making a sound like a question. I have thought a great deal since about which side won. I used to say it was mercy. I am older now, and I think it was something smaller and truer than mercy. I think I simply could not do the other thing. My hands would not do it. There are things a man cannot make his hands do, and closing that flap was one of mine, and I am grateful past all telling that it was. I had a little water left, not much, and I dribbled it careful onto the child's cracked lips off the tip of my finger, and it worked at my finger like a lamb, and I felt my chest come apart. Then I did something I still cannot fully explain. I did not want to leave the young woman there for the buzzard and the wind. It was not my business. It was not my people's way or hers, and I did not know her rights and could not have done them right if I had. But I could not leave her in the open. So I spent the whole of that morning, with the sun climbing and the baby laid in the shade wrapped in my own coat, digging. I dug a grave in the bank of that wash with a folding shovel in my 2 hands, and the ground was hard as a landlord's heart the first 2 feet and then softer, and I dug until my palms bled through my gloves, and I laid that girl in it wrapped in her rust-red blanket. I did not know her name. I still do not. I have carried that not knowing like a stone in my boot for 30 years. Before I covered her, I did one thing more, and this is the thing that I did not understand the meaning of until much later, so I will tell it now and let it sit. In the wagon, tucked under where she had lain, I found a small pouch of soft leather worn smooth, and inside it was a little carving, a bird, worked out of bone, no bigger than my thumb, with tiny wings folded and a hole bored through it for a cord. A child's thing, a keeping thing. I have no doubt in my mind she had made it for that baby, or someone before her had, and it had come down. I took it out. I looked at it a long while, and then I did not bury it with her. I put it in my pocket next to my ledger because it belonged to the living, not the dead, and the living was lying in the shade in my coat. I say I do not know why I did half the things I did that day. That is not quite true. I knew. I just had no words for the knowing. When the grave was filled, I stood over it, and I could not think of a prayer that fit, so I said the only true thing I had. I said, I will take her somewhere, I do not know where yet, but I will not let her be alone. I give you my word, and I keep my word. Ask anybody. Then I felt like a fool for saying it to the dead. And then I felt like less of a fool, because who else was there to say it to? The baby had gone quiet by then. Quiet in a way that frightened me worse than the crying had, because a quiet baby in that heat is a baby giving up, and I knew I did not have the water to keep her, nor the milk, nor the first idea what a child that size needed. I had exactly one thought, and it was a bad one, and it was the only one I had. There was a woman I knew. Half a day's ride east and south, an old Mexican woman named Dolores who ran a goat farm alone since her man died, and she had raised 9 of her own and buried 4. And if there was a soul in that whole country who would not turn me in and would know what to do with a starving infant, it was her. I got up on Josephine with the child bound against my chest inside my shirt, so she could feel my heart, because I had read somewhere or heard somewhere that they settle to a heartbeat, and I do not know if it is true, but it settled me to feel her there, so maybe it settled her too. I looped the little bone bird's cord around my own neck for safekeeping, and I rode east into the worst of the day's heat with a dead girl's whole world beating small and fast against my breastbone. I did not get far before the second hard thing. I was maybe an hour on when I crested a low rise, and there below me, coming up the flat, were 3 riders, white men, and I knew the shape of trouble by then well enough to read it at a distance. They rode loose and easy, the way men ride who are looking for something and have all day to find it, and they were coming more or less toward me, and I had an Apache baby inside my shirt. I have never been a brave man. I want that on the record. I have been a stubborn man, which people mistake for brave, but the two are not the same. Brave is when you are not afraid. Stubborn is when you are afraid clear through and you dig your heels in anyhow because backing up has become the one thing you cannot stomach. I was stubborn that day. My hands were shaking on the reins, and my mouth was dry as the wash behind me, and I thought, plain, they will kill you both. And I turned Josephine down off the rise into a cut where the mesquite grew thick, and I got down, and I put my hand over that baby's mouth so gentle, praying she would not cry, and I waited. I could hear them. Their horses, the creak of leather, one of them laughing at something, an ordinary human laugh, and it was the most terrible sound because I knew what those ordinary laughing men would do. I felt the baby's breath against my palm. I felt her not cry. I do not know how she did not cry. To this day I think she knew. I know that is not sense, I think it anyway. They passed within 100 yards of us and never turned their heads, and their voices got small, and then they were gone over the rise toward the wash, toward the wagon, toward the fresh grave I had dug that any tracker worth his salt would read like a page of print. And there it is, the place I have to end this first telling, because it is where the whole shape of my life bent, and I have never been able to go past it without stopping to breathe. I knelt in the mesquite with a stranger's child asleep against my heart and a bone bird around my neck, and I listened to 3 men ride toward the one grave I had ever dug with my own hands, and I understood 2 things at once, cold and clear. The first was that I had crossed a line I could not uncross. Whatever I had been the day before, a solitary rancher, a keeper of ledgers, a man who minded his own, I was not that anymore. I was something new, and I did not yet have a word for it. The second thing I understood was that they would find the grave, and they would count, and they would come looking for whatever the grave was short. I picked the baby up. I got back on my mule. I did not ride east anymore. I did not sleep that night, and I am not sure the child did either, though she lay quiet against me, and I have wondered since whether the 2 of us kept each other awake by keeping each other alive. I rode wrong on purpose. Any man being hunted learns that the straight road is the fool's road, so I did not take the flat trail east to Dolores' place, but climbed up into the broken country north of it, the Malpais, the Black Rock, where a horse can go lame in 100 yards and no wagon can follow, and even a good tracker curses your name. It cost me. It cost Josephine a stone bruise she limped on for a week after, and it cost me half a day and most of my nerve. But 3 men do not follow a single rider up into the Malpais at dusk, not for the size of bounty a baby brings, not with the light going. I gambled they would read the grave, curse, and quit. I was right, though I did not know it for 2 more days, and 2 days of not knowing is a long time to carry a thing that small and that alive. Here is where I have to tell you about the milk, because it is where I learned the first true lesson of the whole business, which is that a hard heart and a strong back count for nothing against a hungry infant, and that everything I thought made me a capable man was worthless in the one job I now had. She would not take water alone. She needed feeding, and I had nothing to feed her. By the second morning she had gone from crying to that terrible quiet again, and I was half out of my mind, and I did a thing that I would have laughed at any other man for doing. There was a nanny goat, no, I will not stretch it. There was no goat up in the black rock. What there was a can of condensed milk in my saddlebag, sweet stuff I carried for coffee, and there was the last of my water, and there was a corner of clean cloth off my own spare shirt. And I sat on a black rock in the malpais with the sun coming up, and I mixed a little of that milk with a little of that water in my cupped palm, and I twisted the cloth into a teat, and I soaked it, and I gave it to her, and she took it. She took it. She worked at that rag like it was her mother's own, and I sat there on that rock, and I wept like I have not wept since I was a boy. Wept out of pure relief and pure shame and pure something with no name. And Josephine looked at me sideways the way she does, and I told her to mind her business. I want to say a thing here about crying, since I have now confessed to it twice. I come from men who did not. My father wrote his grief in a ledger in ant-track ink and never let it out his eyes, not when my mother died, not when my brother did. I learned the lesson young, and I kept it 40 years. And it took a starving Apache baby in a lava field to break it in me, and I have thought since that maybe that was part of what she came to do. I do not mean anything mystical by that. I mean only that some jobs change the man who takes them, and this one changed me from the inside out, and the crying was just the first crack in the shell. It was near dark on the third day that I came down out of the Malpais to Dollar's Vega's place, and I want to describe it to you the way it looked to me then, because I have loved few sights in my life the way I loved that one. A low adobe house, whitewash gone gold in the last light. A brush corral with a dozen goats in it, and their bells going soft and irregular the way goat bells do. A ristra of red chilies hung by the door, and smoke coming up thin and blue from the chimney. And the smell of it, mesquite and something cooking, corn and lard and green chili. The smell of a place where people lived and ate and did not die alone in wagons. I sat on the ridge above it a long moment before I went down, because I knew that going down meant telling someone, meant making another human being a part of this thing, meant the danger I carried was about to become somebody else's danger too, and I did not have the right to ask that of her. I went down anyway. I did not have a choice, and the baby did not have time. Dolars came out with a shotgun. Of course she did. A woman alone in that country who came to the door any other way would not have lived to be old, and she was old. 60 if she was a day, small and square and brown as the adobe with a face full of lines like a dry riverbed and eyes that missed nothing. She had the gun up and level, and she said something hard in Spanish, and I put both my hands out where she could see them, and I opened my shirt. I will never forget her face changing. It went from the flat readiness of a woman about to shoot a stranger to something else entire in about 2 seconds, and she lowered the gun, and she came across that yard faster than I would have thought her legs could carry her. And she was already talking, low and fast, half Spanish and half something to the baby. And she took the child out of my shirt with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. She peeled back the cradleboard lacing. She looked. She smelled. I saw her put her face right down to the baby's mouth and breathe in, and I did not understand it then, but she was checking the breath, checking for the sweet rot smell that means a starving child has begun to burn itself up from the inside. And then she looked up at me, and she said in English, plain and flat, "How long she no eat proper?" 3 days, I said. Maybe 4, I don't know how long before I found her. I gave her milk from a can, off a rag, it's all I had. And this old Mexican woman who owed me nothing, who I had done business with maybe 3 times in 10 years, looked at me a long, hard moment, and then she said, "The rag save her life. Come inside. Bring your ugly mule out of the light." That was the whole of my welcome, and it was more than I deserved. I will not walk you through every hour of the days that followed, but I have to tell you some of it, because part 2 of any true story is the part where the doing settles into the living, and the living is where the real weight is. Dolars had a goat freshening, that is, a nanny with milk, and within the hour she had that baby taking warm goat's milk off a proper cloth teat she made in about a minute flat. And by the second day the child had color coming back and had found her voice again. And I tell you the sound of that baby crying full and strong in the night, that same sound that had frozen my blood in the wash, had become the most beautiful sound in the whole world to me, because a crying baby is a living baby. And I would lie awake in Dollar's barn listening to it come through the wall, and I would think, she is alive, she is alive. We did that, she is alive. Dollar's named her, more or less, though she said it was not a real name, and only a name to call her until her real one was known. She looked at the child's dark eyes, always turning, always watching everything, and she said, "Pajarita, little bird." And I about came out of my boots because I had not told her, I had not shown her, but I reached into my shirt and I brought out the little bone bird on its cord that I had taken from the dead girl's pouch. And I put it in Dolor's palm, and the old woman went very still, and she closed her fist around it, and she did not say anything for a while. Then she said, quiet, "Somebody loved this baby very much. Somebody carved this and pray on it. You remember that. When it gets hard, you remember somebody love her first before you." I have remembered it. On the days it got hard, and it got hard, I have remembered it. Now I have to tell the second hard thing of this middle part, because a story with no cost is a lie, and this one cost. We had about 2 weeks of grace, the three of us, and I will not pretend they were not among the happiest of my whole life, that strange stolen fortnight in a stranger's house learning to be something I had no name for. And then one afternoon a rider came up the trail, and Dolors went for the shotgun, but I knew the horse. It was a man named Prout, a stock buyer, a decent enough fellow in the ordinary way who had done business with both of us, and he was not hunting anybody. He had just come to buy goats, but he saw me, which he had no cause to expect this far from my own range. And more than that, his eye went past me into the shadow of the door, where Dolors stood with the baby on her hip, and he saw the baby, and I watched him see that it was Apache, and I watched him understand that a thing was going on here that did not add up, and I watched him decide to be polite about it and not ask, which somehow was worse than if he had asked. He bought his goats, he was pleasant, he tipped his hat to Dolors, and he rode away, and I stood in that yard with my stomach gone to ice because Prout was a talker, not a mean man. Just a man who liked the sound of his own news in a saloon, the way half of them do, and I knew the way you know a storm is coming off a certain smell in the wind. That within the week the story would be told in 3 towns, the old Vega woman and the strange rancher Vance and the Apache baby, and that somewhere in one of those saloons would be a man for whom that story was not gossip but money. I told Dolors. She already knew. She had watched Prout's face the same as I had. And we sat up that night at her little table with a candle between us, and we had the conversation that I have gone over 10,000 times since, the conversation that split my life clean in two. Because Dolors said the thing I did not want to hear. She said, "You cannot keep her, Silas." I started to argue, and she put her brown hand flat on the table, not hard, just final, and she said it again, gentle. "You cannot keep her. Not you. Not me. Listen to an old woman. What you are is a white man alone with an Apache child in a country that pays money for her scalp and pays a school back east to take her soul. You keep her, one of 2 things happen. A bad man kills you both for the bounty. Or a good man, a churchman, a soldier, takes her from you legal and sends her away and cuts her hair, and she grows up not knowing one word of who her mother was. Those are the 2 roads, Mijo. You want to hear a third?" I did. God help me, I did, because the first 2 had been eating me alive in the dark for 2 weeks, and I had not been able to say them out loud even to myself. Her people, Dolors said. She has people, somewhere. That woman in the wagon, she was running from something or to something, and she had a band, a family, a mother of her own maybe still living. Apache do not leave their children. They fight and die for their children more than we do, I think sometimes. That woman did not abandon this baby. Somebody took her from her people or drove her out, or she was fleeing a soldier or a raid and she died before she could get back. This baby belongs to someone who is grieving her right now, who does not know she lives. And there it was, the thing I could not bear and could not deny. "I don't know how to find them," I said. My voice came out like a boy's. "I don't even know what band, I don't speak the language, I don't know the country. Dolors, I don't even know her name." And the old woman reached across the table, and she took my 2 hands in her 2 hands, and hers were dry and warm and hard with 60 years of work, and she said, "No. But I know a man who might." The man Dolors knew was called Ignacio, and he was half Mexican and half Chiricahua, and he lived in the wreck of his life at the edge of a settlement called San Simon, and he drank, and he had once, before the drinking, been an interpreter and a go-between for both the army and his mother's people, until both sides decided they could not trust a man who belonged to neither, which is the reward such men usually get. Dolors had known him 30 years. She said he was the only living soul she trusted to walk between the worlds, and not sell, whichever one paid best that day. It took us most of a month to arrange it, and I will not lay out all the careful, dangerous steps of it. The messages passed hand to hand, the waiting, the 2 false starts. The night I sat in a livery in San Simon with the baby under my coat and my heart in my throat, while men I did not know talked in a language I did not speak in the next room. I aged a year in that month. I would not trade it for anything. By the end of that month, I had made a discovery about myself that shamed me and freed me both, and I will set it down here because it is the true middle of my heart in this whole account. The discovery was this: I did not want to find her people. Every step I took toward finding them, I took against my own wish. Because somewhere in that stolen month I had stopped being a man who had rescued a baby and become a man who loved a child, his child, the only child he would ever have. And every night I fed her, and every night she gripped my finger in her fist in her sleep, and every night I thought, maybe Dollars is wrong, maybe there is a way, maybe we could go north, go far, be nobody, keep her. I balanced it in my ledger 100 nights. On one side, everything I wanted. On the other side, one small thing. The one small thing was the truth, that she was not mine. That she had a mother who had died holding her, and past that mother, a whole people grieving her. And that I did not have the right, not the ability I had in my two hands, to decide that a child would never know who she was because an old lonesome white man could not bear to give her up. I have made harder decisions in my life. I have not made a one that cost more. Ignacio found them. Not her mother. Her mother, we came to understand, was the young woman I had buried, and she had died with her name, and I have made my peace mostly with never knowing it. But there was a grandmother. And an uncle, her mother's brother, a young man named, I will not write it, because I asked his leave once to tell his name in this account, and he did not give it, and a man's name is his own. There was a band, a small broken remnant of one, hiding out in the high country trying to stay clear of the reservations and the soldiers both. And the young woman had been of them, and she had been taken. I never learned the whole of it, whether by soldiers or by a rival or by simple bad luck on a road. Taken and carried off and had gotten free somehow with her baby, and had been trying to get back to them up through that dry wash country, when the wound she took in the getting free finally killed her. They had thought her dead a month gone. They did not know the child lived. Ignacio told me all this sitting on a rail outside the San Simon livery with a bottle he was not, for once, drinking from, and when he finished he looked at me sideways and he said, "You understand what this is now, what you have to do." "I understand," I said. "You do not have to," he said, and I think he said it to be kind, to give me a door. "No one would know, no one would ever know but me and the old woman, and we would not tell. You could ride out of here with her. It is a big country." And that was the moment, the real one, the one I have come back to on every hard night of the 30 years since. Because he was right. I could have. The door was open, and no one would have stopped me, and no one would ever have called me anything but a good man who saved a baby's life. I could have kept her and been happy, and no ledger in this world, but my own would ever have carried the debt. I thought about my father's ledger, 2 columns, what is owed to us and what we owe. And I thought about how in all my 41 years of careful accounting I had never once written down the biggest entry of all, the one my father never wrote either, which is what we owe to people we will never meet, to the dead, to the grieving, to a child's right to know her own mother's face in her own people's faces. There is no column for that. My father died without a column for that, and I think it made him a smaller man than he needed to be. And I loved him, and I did not want to die the same. "I'll take her to them," I said. "I gave my word, I gave it to her mother over the grave. I keep my word, ask anybody." Ignacio looked at me a long moment. Then he did a thing I did not expect. He took the bottle beside him and he poured a little of it out onto the ground, slow, the way you do for the dead, and he said something low in a language I did not know, and then he said in English, "That is for the mother, who chose right in the wagon, and for you, who chose right on the rail." And he corked the bottle, and he did not drink from it that night, and I have always been fond of him for that, wherever he has gone. The giving back was done up in the high country in the first snow of that year, and I will tell it plain, and then I will stop, because some things get smaller the more words you put on them. We rode up, Ignacio and me, 3 days into country I had no business in, and on the 3rd evening they came out of the rocks the way they do, all at once without a sound, so that one moment there was empty hillside, and the next there were 7 of them mounted and watching, and my heart near stopped, not from fear of death, but from the sheer strangeness and gravity of it. Ignacio talked. He talked a long time. I did not understand a word, and I did not need to. I understood the old woman. She was tiny, the grandmother, tinier than Dollars even, wrapped against the cold, and when Ignacio said the thing that mattered, when he told her, I know now that her granddaughter's child was alive, and here she made a sound. I have heard grief my whole life. I have made it myself. I never heard a sound like that one. And I hope I never do again, because it went through me like cold water. It was joy and grief so mixed you could not pull them apart. The sound of a woman who had buried hope a month ago digging it up alive. I got down off Josephine. I opened my coat. And I carried the baby. She was fat now, and strong and loud and beautiful, nothing like the cracked, dying thing from the wash. I carried her across the snow to that old woman on her horse, and I held her up. And the old woman looked down into that little face, and I watched her see her dead daughter in it. And she took the child, and the child, my child, the child I had fed off a rag in a lava field, and off my finger in a wash, and had loved past all my own sense. The child went to her without a cry. Went to her like water finding its level, like she knew. I stood there in the snow with my empty coat open and my arms with nothing in them, and I found out what it is to do the right thing and have it feel exactly like the worst thing, both at once, no separating them, and I will tell you the truth. I did not cry then. I had cried plenty by that point, and I was all out. I just stood there hollow as a gourd and let the snow come down. The old woman looked at me a long while over the baby's head. Then she said something to Ignacio, and Ignacio's voice went rough when he turned it into English for me. And what she said was this. She says you carried her granddaughter's child 3 days in the cold to give her back, and any white man might have kept her or sold her, and she does not have a word in her language for what you are, because there has not needed to be one. She says you will be in the story they tell this child. She says the child will know your face before she knows yours, whatever that means, I don't. The bird, I said. I took the little bone bird off my own neck where it had ridden every day for 2 months, warm from my own skin, and I reached up and I put the cord over the baby's head, and I settled it on her small chest, and I said to her, not to the old woman, though she could not understand me and would not remember me, I said, your mother made this, or somebody who loved you made it. You keep it, and you'll know. Someday you'll hold it and you'll know somebody carried you when you couldn't walk, and it don't matter that you won't remember who. You'll know somebody did. The old woman closed her hand over the baby's hand over the bird. And then they were gone, the way they came all at once, into the rocks and the falling snow, and the hillside was empty again. And it was as if none of it had happened, except that my arms were empty and my coat was open, and there was a warm place on my chest going cold where a small weight had ridden for 2 months and was gone. I have kept my ledger since out of habit, but I stopped writing in the 2 columns, my father's columns, what is owed to us and what we owe. I could not make them hold what happened in the snow that day, and I decided that a ledger that cannot hold the truest thing that ever happened to a man is not worth the keeping in the old way. So now I keep it different. Now I only write down 1 column, and I do not have a heading for it, and it is just the things I have seen that were larger than me. The buzzard riding the morning, the rag she took the milk off of, the sound dolors made checking her breath, the bottle Ignacio poured out on the ground, the place on my chest going cold. She would be 30 years old now, near about. A woman, maybe with children of her own, up in some country I will never see, among people who never learned my name and never needed to. I do not know if she lived. That is the plain, hard end of it that I cannot dress up. That country was not kind to her people in the years that followed, and I have no way to know. And I have made a kind of peace with the not knowing, the same peace I made with never learning her mother's name, which is to say, no peace at all, only the daily choosing to carry it. But sometimes, and this is the last thing I will set down, and then I am done, sometimes on a cold morning when the snow is coming and the light goes a certain gold, I put my hand flat against my chest, over the place where the little bird used to ride, and I feel the old cold spot that never quite warmed back up, and I think,